Okay, camera is started. Today is September 14th, 2022. I am the interviewer, Kevin Yee. I'm here with Mr. Russel Jorgenson, who is a veteran of World War II, and we are at the Minnesota Veterans Home in Minneapolis. So thank you a ton for coming today.
Okay.
Can you start by telling me where and when you were born?
Pardon?
Can you start by telling me where and when you were born?
I still didn't get you.
Where and when you were born?
Born?
Yeah.
Well, I was born in a log cabin in northern Minnesota.
Oh, okay.
Just like his address.
Yeah.
Not a valid address today, but that's what they called it then.
Yeah. And what was your birthday?
May 23rd, 1924.
So what did you do while growing up?
Well, obviously I wasn't old enough to do much. I did construction work.
Yeah. And what was your family like? Who were your parents?
Well, my mother came from a town called Østergastal in Norway. My dad came from a town in called Brevik, also in Norway, and they met in a dance hall in Minneapolis.
Oh.
And of course, then they got married, married and so forth.
Did you have like any kind of military background in your family?
In our family?
Yeah.
No, because both my parents came from Norway.
Yeah.
And my dad was a sailor on one of these ships.
Oh.
With the
Yeah.
schooners. They didn't have an engine. They had what do they call them?
Steamboats?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was his experience. And my mother was only 14 when she came to this country, and
Wow.
she went to some school, and so my mother learned to read and write Norwegian or English. I don't think my dad ever did.
So, did you guys speak Norwegian at home?
Yes, I spoke Norwegian at home all the time.
Yeah.
I learned to speak English in school. The one of the episodes I have about school, I remember a teacher cried a lot. And of course, I was a kid, didn't realize what the problem was. All the kids were foreigners that spoke a foreign language.
Yeah.
And she was a young one, freshly out of school, and she just couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
Well, then she was gone, and then they got a different teacher in, and she was a little older, and she knew how to handle it.
Yeah. In your town, were there a lot of other Norwegian immigrants?
Yes, basically my whole family. My mother had one sister living in northern Minnesota. She had two sisters living in South Dakota. My dad had, well, actually, my mother had two brothers also living in Minnesota. And my dad had no family in Minnesota. His dad had died or been killed early in life, and so he had a stepdad, and so consequently he had gone to sea when he was only about 14 or 15. So that was their background.
Yeah. So, did you grow up during the Great Depression?
Pardon?
Did you grow up during the Great Depression?
I still didn't get you.
Growing up Did you experience the Great Depression at home very much?
Experience what?
The Great Depression?
Depression?
The Great Depression. So.
Oh, during the Depression, yes, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. What was that like for you?
Well, as a child, we always had food because we had a farm, and so consequently, children didn't worry about where the food came from. But we were always, we did not experience hunger or anything like that. We were always well taken care of.
Yeah.
But we didn't have any money.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when I say we didn't have any money, I mean we didn't have any money. And I think when I went to high school, I stayed in there was a dormitory there. And my dad didn't have 10 cents to give to me to take with me. Just money was scarce.
Yeah. And at the same time, did you know what was going on over in Europe with Germany?
Pardon?
At the same time, did you know what was happening over in Europe with Germany and the war?
Well, to a degree, because we heard it. We didn't have radio or anything like that, but other neighbors did, and so we knew what was going on. But you have to remember that when the Germans occupied Norway, my dad's mother was alive and well there. Plus, he had brothers in Norway that were there, and my mother had family there as well. So consequently, they couldn't communicate with them when they were occupied. So they didn't know how it was going. When the occupation was over and they could communicate again, then they found out what had been taking place.
Yeah. So, do you remember what inspired you to join the military?
Pardon?
Do you remember what made you want to join the military?
Do I remember?
What made you want to join the military?
Well, because we were. You got to remember, the United States was not prepared for war when Pearl Harbor took place, and so consequently there was a great feeling of responsibility that we needed to get in, and because what people don't realize, the United States was fighting for its life at that time, and so it was. Everybody was supportive. There was no anti-war at that time. It was everybody was involved with. The people at home were involved working in airplane plants, building airplanes, and then they had places they were making guns and ammunition and stuff. I mean, the whole country was geared towards salvation.
Yeah.
And so consequently, that as a young person, we just felt that that's what we needed to do.
And were you in high school before you enlisted?
I wasn't in high school then. I had gone to high school for 2 years.
Yeah.
And the third year, I felt that I needed to go and take care of myself physically. And so I wound up going to a friend of my dad's in Starbuck, Minnesota, to work on a farm. And while I was there, I was paid $10 a month plus board and room. So in those days during the Depression, if you could get enough food and to stay alive, well, that was the key.
That was good.
And that's what I felt I needed to do. So
yeah.
I had left home already when I was 16, and when I was 17 is when Pearl Harbor took place, and then I joined the service almost right away, and so I didn't experience much other than joining the service and going overseas.
Yeah. So, once you enlisted, how did your friends and family feel?
Pardon?
Once you enlisted, how did your friends and family feel about you going away?
Well, obviously, my mother and dad was supportive of the war because
Norway.
their country was under German occupation.
Yeah.
As well as the United States was fighting to protect itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so there wasn't anybody that was against it.
Yeah.
Everyone was for it. My parents, being Norwegian, they didn't go anywhere work in a defense plant because they weren't that qualified in English and stuff like that, and so consequently they didn't do that. They lived at home on the farm, but they had to go to a post office and register as aliens every year.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to do that because they were, but you see, people that were born in this country, I was born in this country, I was a citizen. And they weren't, my parents didn't become citizens until they were about 70 years old.
Yeah.
So they lived a whole life in the United States without being citizens.
Oh, wow. So once you joined, where did you go for boot camp?
Pardon?
Where did you go for boot camp?
Where did I go for
Boot camp.
boot camp?
Mm-hmm.
Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. And all we did there was exercise and learn marching and stuff. Wasn't there very long before I wound up going to Las Vegas Gunnery School and learning to become a gunner on a bomber.
Mm-hmm. And what do you remember about boot camp and gunnery school?
Well, not much. It was exciting to me. You can remember when I went to 18 years old. I come from a farm. Everything was new and exciting, and that's all I could say. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. And do you remember any of your drill instructors?
Pardon?
Do you remember any of your drill instructors?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. So just a lot of marching, practicing. Yeah. Okay. So where did you go after gunnery school?
Well, after gunnery school, I wound up going to Tucson, Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And there we were made into a crew.
Yeah.
And we spent a month in Tucson, Arizona, flying B-17s every night and practicing as a crew to function as a bomber crew. And then after a month there, then the next place we went to was Alamogordo, New Mexico, for what they called a second month's training. And that was 1 month that we spent a lot of time flying at nighttime, and mostly that we flew at nighttime and practicing activities as a crew. Mm-hmm. I would get in my ball turret, and it's almost like being up there and without floating through the air because couldn't see the plane.
Oh,
all you could see was down.
You were below the plane.
Yeah.
Right? In a little glass ball.
Right.
Yeah.
It was kind of a unique place to be in.
Yeah.
And actually, it was the most dangerous place to be in if you wound up in combat that way. But I didn't wind up in combat. I wound up, like I told you, going to the canal zone and flying submarine patrol. Mm-hmm. And there we didn't use 17s, we used B-24s.
Yeah.
So my bomber crashes were in B-24s.
So who was in your crew? Do you remember the names?
Pardon?
Do you remember the names of your crewmates?
Of the crews?
Yeah.
Well, the pilot was Captain Cotton, and the co-pilot was Lieutenant Baldridge.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the bombardier's name, but the navigator was I got it on the tip of my tongue, but I can't say it. But anyhow, what the bomber crews were consist of the pilot, co-pilot was their name, and then the bombardier and the navigator. They were all commissioned officers. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the crew, we had an engineer that had work to do between the pilot and the co-pilot when they were taken off. And then there was a radio operator, he had his function to do. And then there was the tail gunner, all he had to do was being a tail gunner. And then they had what they called two waist gunners in the bomber, the one for one side right and one for the left. And so you wound up with a crew of 5 enlisted men and 4 officers. And even though they were officers, there wasn't much, there was pretty much just good relations between all the men. It wasn't like officers demanding enlisted men to salute. We hardly never saluted because we functioned as a crew.
Yeah. So we're all.
Lieutenant Jacobs. That was the navigator.
Oh, okay.
And the bombardier, I don't remember. And then there was a guy by the name of Gilliam. Mm-hmm. Then there was another one by the name of Haggard. And then there was, the engineer was, I don't remember his name either, but we functioned pretty well as a crew, and so we lived together as a crew. Mm-hmm. And so we lived in tents in the Philippines, and we lived together as a crew. Mm-hmm. We flew as a crew starting out, but as time went on and things happened, then a radio operator would quite often be put on another crew. So I flew with different crews later on, mission, and not like you had any choices as to what you were doing. When you're in the service, they say you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And I, contrary to what's like today, people were extremely obedient when I was a youngster. And so in the service, I was, with no question about obedience. If somebody was in charge and they told it, and they were in charge, they told you to do something, that's what you did. So consequently, sometimes I would have to fly with different crews because of that.
Yeah. Did you enjoy being with your crew? Did you
Pardon?
Did you like the other men in your crew? Did you like the other men in your crew?
Did I like them?
Yeah.
It's interesting. One of the guys was from Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to, and I knew that at that time, people from the South were still concerned about the Civil War.
Oh.
And I would tease him a little bit, and he'd get angry. And when he got angry about it, well, then I would quit teasing him. But it was all good-natured because I wasn't, you might say, a part of the northern thing. I was just I was a kid of aliens, and so to me, the Civil War didn't really mean anything to me one way or the other. But I soon learned that it was important to the people of the South. What was important, they didn't like that they were defeated. That's what it was. And if you read history, well, you will read about the South and the North, and you realize that what took place needed to take place to keep the countries as one country. But in the same token, people were involved, and nobody likes losing, which you're well aware of. And so that thing, even though people realized that it was necessary.
Yeah. So was your crew from all over the country?
Pardon?
Were the men in your crew from all over the country?
I still don't get you.
Were the men in your crew from all over the country?
Yes. I had one, I can name, there's different crews, it's different distinct, but they were from, I think our engineer was from New York, and Haggard was from Texas, Galveston, Texas, and because I was from Minnesota. Oh yeah, Gilliam, he was from Florida. He was from Orlando, Florida. So yeah, they came from all over, and again, there was no animosity amongst the people because of that. Basically, one of the things that's great about America is the fact that people from all different lands come here and they can do well, and it's good. That's why they want to come here. So yeah, we got along.
Yeah. So after Tucson, where did you go with your crew?
Well, like I said, I wound up going to the Canal Zone during the war.
Yeah.
And then I wound up going to the South Pacific. And then, like I said later, I re-enlisted. I went to occupation in Germany. So I was stationed in all three different areas.
Wow.
In the Canal Zone, there was, we wound up in a place called Agua Dulce, was in the jungle. And the thing that I remember that, coming from northern Minnesota farm, I wasn't accustomed to all of these orange trees and everything, you know. Well, when I got down there, orange trees all over, you could go and help yourself to oranges. That was quite an expression, surprise to me.
Yeah. Had you ever traveled very far before the war?
Well, when we were flying bombers, obviously I was stationed in Germany, but we used to have I used to fly to Marham, England just about every week, and a lot of times I would wind up flying to Paris. I landed at Orly Field in Paris, and I also flew to Rome, Italy, and so yeah, I covered a lot of territory, and as far as my living is concerned, I pretty much just lived in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
Other than, well, in the service, I was in California for quite a bit.
So in Panama, what did your crew do? What was your mission?
Pardon?
In Panama, what was your crew's mission?
What about animals?
When you were in the Canal Zone, what was your crew's mission?
I still don't get you.
When you were in the Canal Zone,
Yeah.
what was your crew's mission? Or what did you guys do?
Well, basically, in the Canal Zone, like I said, I was involved with training crews to fly submarine patrol.
Oh,
But
okay.
I was also stationed in Guatemala City, where we flew patrol from Guatemala City to the Galapagos Islands. Well, we would have 4 planes going down to the Galapagos Islands, and then we would stay overnight there.
Mm-hmm.
So consequently, there would be 4 planes that when you stay overnight, the next day you would fly back. Well, they had 4 planes going down, they had 4 planes coming back, so you might say they had 8 planes going in the air and doing submarine patrol. And basically there wasn't just submarine patrol, they were concerned about Japanese coming in there with aircraft carriers and things like that. They were protecting the canal, what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because the canal was an extremely important asset during the World War.
Yeah. Did you ever have any free time when you were stationed?
Have any what?
Did you ever have free time or slow days?
Free time?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't have a lot of free time. We didn't have any place to go anyhow.
Yeah.
But we had duties we had to carry out during cleaning your latrine or toilet and cleaning your areas and picking up stuff. And so yeah, we had duties we had to do. And but other than that, with free time, wasn't much to do.
Yeah.
They had some places they would have movies. You could go to movies. I never was much even in those days. I didn't care much for watching movies.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, what you do? Well, we had what we call beer taverns, not taverns, beer gardens.
Yeah.
And that's where most of our social activity went on. You'd go there and even different, you'd sit around and drink beer and visit with one another. That's the only place you had to go, you know, unless you went to town. Well, in the Canal Zone, you didn't have any big town you wanted to go to.
Yeah.
And so you didn't go much, and you just stay there.
What were the living conditions like? Where did you sleep and eat?
Pardon?
Where did you sleep and eat when you were in the Canal Zone?
I still didn't get that.
Where did you sleep and eat when you were at the canal?
Where did I?
Sleep and eat.
Pardon?
Where did you sleep and eat?
Where did I sleep?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had these army cots that we would sleep on.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't necessarily but they would fold down so that you could carry them. But that's what we slept on. And in the Philippines, we had hired Filipinos to build a outside